In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. We've got a real treat this week. I have a person that is a friend of mine, but someone I've admired for many years. He is a New York Times bestselling author, philanthropist, and also a major influencer in the world. My guest is Joseph Grenny, and Joseph is the author of one of the authors of Crucial Conversations, Crucial Accountability, Influencer, and Change Anything, all of the crucial learning programs that I actually teach as a master trainer. And I'm so excited to have Joseph here because I want to talk about a lot of different things in our time together. But if you ever get a chance to hear this man live, make sure you do it. He's one of the best public speakers I've ever engaged with. Every time I listen to him, I get something out of it. And also, I'm going to post on his podcast here a link that you could actually go see on a talk he did in Ogden, Utah in July of 2019, how 100 felons actually changed his life, changed his conversation around some things that touched him, and what Joseph's doing around an organization called TOSA. So Joseph, welcome to the show. Glad to have you here. Thanks for making time to be here with us.
Me too. Nice to be back with you, Greg.
Thanks so much. So Joseph, what I'd like to do is just kind of jump in because we've known each other since probably 2001. So quite a long time. Don't get to see each other that much, but working with Crucial Conversations and all the work we do, you put a book out there that really changed my life. You might not even know this when I took the class. I actually went out and cleaned up every relationship in my past.
Wow.
And had a list of 36 people. Took me nearly 2.5 years, but I wanted to stand in front of people with an experience about the material rather than a theory about it. And I'm writing a book right now about those experiences, cleaning up those relationships, and it just meant so much to me. So let's start real quickly with how you got into writing the books, your group, and then I'd like to fast forward to what you're doing now. So let's start with how you got into, with the group you did, Crucial Learning, of writing the books, Crucial Conversations and Crucial Accountability.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are so many threads that come together. They say that you live your life forward, but you only understand it backward. And now looking backward, I can see so many things that prepared me to do what I'm doing now, and who knows what it prepares me to do in the future. But, one of my first recollections of a Crucial Conversation was a little store I had. I started a microcomputer company back in 1976, and I had a storefront in Suisun, California. And a guy came in and shoplifted. And I was the only person in the store. I'm 17 years old. This guy wearing a military uniform buys a magazine and then stuffs some integrated circuits into the middle of it. And he's about to walk out the door. And I was terrified. I was beside myself. And it wasn't just about would I be physically under threat, but just the interpersonal dynamic was so absolutely horrifying to me. And the only thing I could think of to do as he was browsing around the store trying to cover his tracks was to go lock the front door and then hide in the back. So this was me. This was me before. So, fast forward, it's now 10 years later, and I'm partners with Al Switzler, Ron McMillan, and Carrie Patterson. And we're looking at organizations and trying to understand what keeps collectively, what keeps individually brilliant people from being collectively smart, from doing things that are extraordinary. And what we found time and time again is the inability to talk about emotionally and politically risky things seem to be at the root of most organizational disappointments. So the big idea, the big finding from our research is that you can tell the health of a relationship, the health of a team, even the health of an entire organization by looking at one simple thing. And that is the average lag time between when people see it and when they say it, or when they feel it and when they discuss it. that lag time, our inability to get the most important things in our lives out on the table and discuss them thoroughly and lovingly with one another is really at the heart of most of the mischief that we see today in society, that we see between nations, that we see in families, that we see in cities and communities. And so that's kind of the two paths. It was both my own personal growth path and some of my own inadequacies, but also really a disciplined organizational study that brought us inevitably to that conclusion.
Yeah. Well, when you wrote the book, did you have any clue as to how big it may become?
It's funny you say that. Yeah, I think it's Marianne Williamson who said it's our light, not our darkness, that terrifies us, and that most of us are playing way too small. When we went to the publisher and finally got an offer for somebody to represent the book, the first question I asked them was, "What's the worst selling book that you've ever had?" Because my goal was just to be at least the second worst. And
That's great.
we knew the idea had merit. We knew that it was an important idea that was way bigger than us. But the question was, did we have any capacity to contribute to that idea, to bring it to the world in a way that's worthwhile? And that's where some of our sense of inadequacy and worry came from. Well, the worst selling book of all time for McGraw-Hill was one they called People Who Spontaneously Combust. And it makes the mind reel just thinking about it, but it made sense to me. It didn't sell well because by the time you combust, you're probably not buying a book anymore.
Right.
And so the market really was a little too late for the purchase. But ours you can get in front of, crucial conversations. We know there are ones we failed in the past, but there are ones we're going to face inevitably in the future. And so the fact that it hit the bestseller list quickly, the fact that it got picked up internationally, to us was so gratifying, and we feel a tremendous stewardship to try to continue to share the ideas in a way that can bless lives.
Yeah. Well, it really changed mine because I remember I took several different classes working on cleaning up some things, and people always say, you need to go have this conversation. You need to go have this conversation, but no one really tells you how to do it. And what I love is it is a skill-based program where these are the things you actually do and what to look for. And it really changed how I approach every conversation. What I tell people all the time is it gave me my voice back. It allowed me to speak my truth respectfully. And it made a difference in cleaning up those relationships, even a divorce I was going through at the time, and just helped me so much. And now I have amazing relationships, and people come and say, well, do they still, what's it like now? I tell people it still get muddy from time to time. I still have to go back and use the skills. Some people have this idea that you're going to be perfect somewhere. There's just not that with it. But I know you get, I get all the time feedback of this really is life-changing for me. That must be one of the best pieces out of this, besides it being successful. You probably heard thousands of stories of how it could change people's lives.
It is gratifying. And I want to say two things. First of all, one of the reasons I have such a deep admiration and affection for you, Greg, is precisely what you say. The fact that you understand that our ability to influence others depends not just on our intellectual preparedness, but our moral worthiness. And the moral worthiness comes from us trying ourselves, being in the struggle ourselves. And I find the same. If I'm getting ready to, I was at the Other Side Academy in Denver, which we'll talk about here shortly, and I was doing a lecture on Master My Stories and trying to share with students how to make sure, how to gain emotional competence, the ability to regulate our own emotions. And prior to doing it, I always have to sit down and do a personal review and say, where am I hanging on to things that I'm not stepping up to and using the tools with? And until I clean that up, I'm not prepared to have an influence on anybody else. So I really respect and I appreciate that. The other thing is you're asking about impact and hearing stories and things like that. I have this deep sense of reverence about the work you and I get to do with this, because you realize that you are entering the most intimate and important areas of people's lives. And time and again, when people will tell me what the book has meant to them, they'll talk about a sacred conversation with a teenager or with a spouse with whom a relationship was fraying, or a coworker that they'd gained, that they'd become distant from. And the fact that they they trusted us enough to hold them by the hand, to go into that moment and to offer some ideas about how they can be the person they want to be in that moment is a tremendous responsibility.
It really is. And it's also just an honoring one. People ask me all the time what I do for a living. I said, I get to hand out ice water in the desert because everyone needs this. And it's something that we can supply. And looking the look on their face when they have an ability to say something they never were able to do before. It really gives people something back to their spirit, I believe, as well, that they can actually hold their head up and speak their truth respectfully. So thank you. And I want to fast forward though, because folks, Joseph built the program and all the other programs with Crucial Learning, and then later decided to engage with creating a organization called the Other Side Academy. We call it TOSA. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about TOSA. And I want to share my experience when I went and visited as well. Share with us how you came up, why you came up with the idea of TOSA, and walk us through what you do and where it currently is.
Well, when people ask me why we did it, I always have to ask, do you want the truth or do you want the sanitized version?
The truth.
All right, well, I'm going to give you the truth.
Okay.
So the truth is twofold. The first is that we had two boys that got into drugs and were in and out of jail and were destroying their lives. And as is often the case, our loved ones want our help less than that of most anybody else. So they were having nothing to do with my wife and myself as they were off running and gunning and burning down their lives. And one thing I believe about life is that when you can't fight the battle you want, you get into the war. And so there's a lot more places to fight than just for the loved one that doesn't necessarily want your help right now. So my wife and I decided to get into the war. The second piece of it is I co-authored a book that you're familiar with called Influencer. And one of the case studies in there is about a place called Delancey Street in California. Started back in 1972. It's this remarkable place. And what I want most people to hear first is it's free. It's 2 to 4 years long. It's residential. It's for people with long histories of addiction, crime, and homelessness who have burned down their lives and need to learn to rebuild them from the ground up. And it's free. It was remarkable to me. And as I visited there and found this place that is one of the healthiest organizations in the world, run by a bunch of criminals. For you and I, who are organizational experts, who are scholars that go in and work with Nobel Prize winners and some of the best and brightest in the world who just can't get along with one another, and with whom dysfunction is the norm, to go into this place that's run by longtime felons and to see them running world-class organizations and changing lives was absolutely overwhelming to me. So we wrote about it and I'd studied it. And it wasn't until our boys started getting into trouble. And here's the part that I'll just be blunt about. God told me to do it. So I didn't ask for it. I didn't sign up for it. I wasn't out there looking to say, hey, I'd like to spend more time around criminals in my life. And, none of that. I got, of all things, a guy who was on his way to a 26-year prison sentence was arrested in jail. He had hoped to have the cops kill him. He was high on meth, had a car full of forged documents, and got in a high-speed chase. They busted out his tires and detained him, took him to jail, and 3 days later, he wakes up in a cell and wants to kill himself. And he has this come to God moment where he says, if there is somebody up there, now's the time I'd like to find out about it, because I see nothing in my life that's worth living for. Well, he became, after having this profound spiritual experience in a jail cell, he starts becoming this self-improvement junkie. And he's reading scripture, he's talking to everybody with any religious idea in the entire jail. And finally he starts reading self-improvement books, and he reads Influencer. He reads about Delancey Street. And he reaches out to me and says, hey, I'm going to be detained for quite a while. I got a 26-year sentence, but when I finish, he said, I know I'm going to need a lot more help than I've ever had in the past. Would you help me get to Delancey Street? And it was in that conversation, my first response was when he asked me this question was kind of glib. I said, I don't think I'll be busy 26 years from today. So yeah, absolutely happy to help you out. And I hung up the phone. And after hanging up the phone, I had this overwhelming impression that that was not only the wrong answer, it was an offensive answer. That phone call had come for a reason, and that God had an expectation of me, and that's what got us to where we are today.
Wow, that is an amazing story. Is that the person who's running TOSA with you now, or is this someone else?
Yeah, that's somebody else. So the story starts with us helping people get to Delancey Street, but as that process was underway, we started realizing, no, this is about more than that. One of my frustrations with Delancey Street is it hadn't been replicated. That here's this ingenious methodology for fundamentally transforming lives that costs the taxpayers nothing, that's free to the people that need the help. It's absolutely everything everybody's ever looked for. And yet there were only just a couple of little campuses of this, and it hadn't been replicated. So I kept nudging them and saying, why, and how can I help you? And I understand organizations. Can I volunteer and help you out with that? But they were having none of it. So that was why I think the instruction came, then put your money where your mouth is, do it.
Yeah. And so you started the first one in Salt Lake City, and now you're in Denver. What barriers have you run into? Maybe Salt Lake City, and maybe the difference in possibly barriers at Denver. I know you want to spread it out even more. What are some of the barriers you typically run into?
Yeah, in fact, now there are a total of 6 campuses. Not all are called the Other Side Academy, but the Academy brings people in and mentors them so that they can go start them themselves. So there's now a second campus in Utah run by a different group, another one in Iowa, a couple in Pennsylvania. So it's spreading, and we intend to have what we call a bench in every city in the world that wants one. A bench, as you know, is the portal. That's the place you sit to say, I'd like to be interviewed and I'd like to join the community. But the next big innovation is to take this exact same model and apply it to homelessness. So we're hoping, in fact, tomorrow night is a city meeting. So the time will be different by the time this podcast airs. Hopefully by then the city council will have voted. We're trying to rezone a 37-acre parcel of land, build 430 homes that will have a community, a self-reliant community that helps change the lives of those who are chronically homeless, just like the Other Side Academy does. It'll be called the Other Side Village. So stay tuned and watch for that. But that's another apparent thing that God wants done.
That's great. Well, I did see something where where the Other Side Academy gave a large check to homelessness in Salt Lake City, and I thought, here's amazing. These people are out there giving of their time, their money to do something for others when that never would have been shown up in their life before.
Yeah, I've been part of so many of these unlikely moments, these moments that nobody would conceive of happening on this planet. 110 felons in Salt Lake City who collectively would otherwise be serving about 700 years of incarceration instead made a $50,000 donation to inaugurate the beginning of this, the Other Side Village. And, you know, on what planet does this kind of stuff happen?
Yeah, exactly. And the one you're helping create, that's what I have to say. So thank you. Let me kind of walk people through what someone coming into the Other Side Academy, what they might run into to get accepted. What's the kind of the process? Because I always thought that was very interesting. And folks, real quick, I want to just share. I went, and you can go and do a view of the campus, and they'll take you on a tour, and you'll meet some of the people. The gentlemen I met were just amazing. You could tell they had a light on that most people don't. And you could tell they had been changed. One person was just tatted throughout his body, young, good looking, but his story was just really powerful. But you could tell he was a different person than the one he was describing to me. So can you walk people through how they get into TOSA in the first place, and kind of the process, talking about the bench? I think that's a great story as well.
Yeah. So I was in Denver this last weekend at our campus, and I saw it happen both of the ways it can happen. So the first is you've been arrested again. Our average student's been arrested 25 times. So you're in jail one more time, facing new charges. From there, you can write us a letter. And in the letter is basically your application. Tell us why you want to join the Other Side Academy and what kind of charges you're facing. And then folks from our community, and these are just older students in the house. One of the students I got to talk to this last weekend, Armando, has now been with us for about 20 months. He's coming up on his second year, and he got to go back to the same jail that he's been incarcerated in multiple times and conduct interviews. You think again about unlikely moments. And for him, his heart races a little bit because every time he's approached that jail, it's only been about one thing. But then he gets to square his shoulders and he's got a lanyard around his neck that says, I'm there on official business and I'm here to do something good. So he interviews a guy, and if he accepts him, the guy gets an acceptance letter, and then he takes that to the judge and prosecutor and tries to persuade them that this would be a good alternative to the whatever it is, 5 to life sentence or, multi-month sentence that he's got in jail or what have you. And so if the judge agrees, then he comes to the Other Side Academy and he commits to a minimum of 2.5 years. Now, that's an important thing to understand. It's a minimum. So if you've got somebody who's been shooting heroin for 20 years, living on the streets, arrested 25 times, it's an insult what we do today. We say, let's send you to a 60-day program or a 90-day program and assume that that's going to make a dent in what you actually need to change your life. It's absolutely horrific. And we are flushing tens of billions of dollars in this country down the drain with no accountability, involving people in these things that don't work. So they cost a fortune, but at least they don't work, right? We got the best of both worlds. And here we got the Other Side Academy and this kind of model, at least, that costs nothing and has tremendous outcomes. And part of it is the length of it. People have a chance to learn to live in a healthy community by just practicing living in a healthy community, connecting with other people, solving problems, becoming moral and decent and hardworking and compassionate. So they stay for a minimum of 2.5 years. After 2.5 years, they're forgiven of whatever outstanding sentence they had, but they can choose to stay longer if they want. I was at lunch yesterday with 5 of our students who were all facing graduation that said, I'm going to stay longer. Now, you think about that. When you and I were at the end of, think of what we've done in the past, maybe your bachelor's degree. We wanted out of college the fastest we could, right? In fact, we were done a year before we got our degree. And yet here are people that are saying, I want to continue to stay. I'm willing to accept the limitations on my life that entails, because number one, I'm becoming somebody that I love and admire. Number two, I love the people in this house and I want to continue to help them become who they're supposed to be. And so these 5 students are just remarkable human beings to me. I'll tell you, I served a 2-year mission for my church when I was 19 years old till I was 21. And at 21, if you would have said, Joseph, hey, you can stay a 3rd year if you want, I would have said, hell no. I know it's ironic I say it that way, but
No.
yeah. Well, I said, I'm done. I'm going home. And here we've got people who've been doing drugs and living on the streets who are choosing to sacrifice some comfort and some convenience to be able to help save lives. I have nothing but respect. So anyway, path 1 is you're in jail. Path 2 is you just walk in. And so we have people all the time in our Denver campus who are living on the streets. They wake up one day, the person next to them overdoses, and they say, I'm sick of this. I'm tired of this life. I want something better. They walk in the front door, they sit on the bench, and they wait a little while for an interview. And if they're accepted, their life changes beginning that day. So they have to pay nothing. They get new clothes. They're part of a family. They get fed. They live in a mansion that's on a city park in downtown Denver, a beautiful place, and they become part of a life-changing community.
That's just beautiful. And as you've done this, I'm sure you've also seen those kind of fall on the wayside as well. I know those are heartbreaking, but I read an article you put about someone who fell off and come back. I don't know if you remember the article. You wrote it maybe for a different group, but it came across my desk and I read it. I thought that is so inspiring. Can you share, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, there are multiple stories. You may be referring to Jesse, and Jesse was one of the very first students we had in Salt Lake City. He was our typical student. He'd been violent, greedy, racist, just a narcissist, a sadist. He'd been every kind of awful thing that you could imagine prior to coming to the Other Side Academy. And he was different than some because it was like a light went on in him the day he arrived. A lot of students that have been sneaky and lying and manipulative and all that before, they continue to be that when they arrive. And it takes a little while to start overcoming some of those deeply ingrained attributes, but not Jesse. Jesse, he was done. He became all about trying to change his life and save the lives of others. When a new student came in, he was the first to put his arm around them. When somebody needed correction, he was the first to speak up. If someone was compromising what was going on in the house, he defended the house. He was just an absolute stalwart. After 2 years, he decided to stay a 3rd year. After a 3rd year, he said, I want to stay in here and become a leader in the house. And then at one point he left abruptly. He left for cheap sex. He left because he just wanted to go out and have some of the experiences he'd had before. And it absolutely crushed us. We were brokenhearted. We did everything we could to hunt him down, to figure out where this guy was. And he was having none of it. I would find out that he was on social media, so I'd post something. I'd have somebody pass his phone number to me and send him a text, and nothing. And when people are in that place, they don't want to hear it from the other side. And at that point, I had to just leave it in God's hands. And that's what I did. It turns out he's a little better at the work than I am. And so I surrendered it that way. But I got to tell you, Greg, like you would have, almost every night I'm praying for him and saying, if there's a way I can be back in this guy's life, I want to be. And here I am. Just call me in, coach, and tell me what to do. It was months and months and months later when two of our team were headed to Utah County Jail to do some interviews. When they got halfway there, the jail called and said, hey, don't come because there's been a problem here. And so we're not going to be allowing any outsiders in. They turned around, went home disappointed. Well, it turns out that was God making that happen. Because 3 weeks later, when they were able to go in, was the day that Jesse, after having been arrested and having been so sick and beaten that he was in the infirmary for a long time, he was finally back out in general population in one of the pods. Had they arrived at jail that day, what happened next would never have happened. They walked past his pod. He saw them first, and he literally tried to hide his face. He did not want them seeing who he was or where he was. And he was so emaciated. His teeth were gone. He'd lost his glasses. He was just a pale shadow of who he had been before. And so he cowered down, but Robin looked over and she saw him. And she ran into his jail cell. She grabbed him by his shoulder. She lifted him to his feet and she hugged him around his waist. And he melted into a sob, just began sobbing uncontrollably. And Robin said, I love you. I love you. I love you. Dave then saw and he followed and grabbed a hold of him. The two of them embraced him. No commitments were made. Nothing happened then, but they connected with him and they told him he needs to come back. He still wasn't sure that he had the courage or even the hope left in him to do that. But after a couple more days, Robin came back, brought him a couple of things and stayed in touch with him. He finally decided he wanted to come. And we were frustrated because it seemed like the judge was saying, look, we've tried the Other Side Academy and we're not going to send you back there again. And it looked hopeless for a little while. He was going to do the prison sentence and we were going to lose Jesse. But God had another plan. And that plan was Jesse needed to be in that jail cell for another month. Why? Because all 5 of his cellmates ended up coming to the Other Side Academy and he needed a month to convince them to do that. One by one, they started to come. Jesse was still there. The next one came and they tell us how Jesse was doing. And the next one, after the last one left, the judge said, I get it. Let's have him go to the Other Side Academy. He's now been with us for another 1.5 years. The light is back on and it's working again. And he's who he's supposed to be. And it's I get to see the most unlikely things happen day after day after day because we're right where God's doing it.
I love that story because we're redeemed and sometimes we're scared to be. We kind of push it away ourselves and we don't feel worthy. And the open arms, I can tell by what you're talking about, those people showing him love brought him back. And that's how powerful that can be. And I appreciate what you've done in that, creating the space for that to show up over and over. And I would say you get to see miracles nearly every day as you do this. I'm sure breakthroughs and reunited relationships. And Joseph, I want to say thank you for what you're doing in the world. I mean, I know you could have probably taken off and not done anything else, but there were other plans for you. And thank you for listening to those and putting them into play in the world. And it also, we're going to post some things where people can get a hold of anything way they can support the Other Side Academy. I want to make sure you have opportunity to do that, because maybe leaders need to be talked in different cities. If you need any help with that, maybe people who hear this can actually reach out and help. Because I know even when you started in Salt Lake City, you have some officials who were kind of against it, who have kind of flipped the switch and they're supporters now. So if someone could support you, what are some of the things, because I know the Other Side Academy does things on their own, but what support could people give you?
And the most important support is everyone knows someone that needs to be there. And we take people from all over the world. So if you know somebody that needs long-term help to really fundamentally transform their life, then go to theothersideacademy.com, give us a call. Happy to talk, happy to connect. And so as long as if they have charges in some other state, it's a little complicated sometimes, but miracles happen. So that's the first. The second is those who have resources. As we continue to expand, we don't need operational funds because the Other Side Academy is self-reliant, but we do raise capital funds. So if we're going to start a campus in a new location or purchase a new building to expand our services and so forth, that can be helpful as well.
Good. Well, Joseph, thank you again, all the great work you're doing. And folks, thank you for listening to this episode. I know you probably loved it just like I did, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.